My dad laughed when I said I wanted to be a chef. Then he and my brother kicked me out, stole my identity, and framed me for tax fraud. Years later, I walked into their boardroom in a suit, and they had no clue I owned everything. I'll never forget the way they looked at me that night, like I was something broken, something weak. I was 18, standing in the middle of our kitchen, and I just told my dad I didn't want to follow in the family business, that I didn't want to spend my life hauling bricks and yelling over buzzsaws and cigarette smoke. I told him, instead, I wanted to be a chef. For a second, there was silence. A long, painful silence that stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. Then my dad laughed. Not a soft chuckle, but that harsh, chest-thumping kind of laugh that makes you feel stupid just for opening your mouth. He looked over at my brother, Mason, who smirked with his arms folded, already dressed in our family's signature uniform, dusty jeans, steel-toed boots, and the neon orange vest he wore like a badge of honor. "You hear that?" my dad bellowed. "Wants to play with frickin' parsley instead of real tools." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, holding my ground, hands clenched at my sides. I was already used to the ridicule. I'd been the weird one since I could walk. While Mason was out helping pour concrete with my dad, I was at home trying to recreate the spaghetti bolognese I saw on TV with canned sauce and dried oregano. While they were lifting drywall, I was flipping through cookbooks I secretly borrowed from the library, trying to understand the difference between a chiffonade and a julienne. My family didn't get it. Or maybe they just didn't care to. Growing up in a household like mine felt like living in a world where being sensitive was a sin. My dad ran a construction company and expected both his sons to follow suit. "Real men build," he used to say, pounding his chest like some kind of discount caveman. But I didn't fit the mold. The name-calling started early. Princess. Soft. Mama's boy. Even though Mom divorced Dad when I was 10 and moved to another state, her name still lingered around me like a curse word. My interests were treated like defects. Even at family dinners, when I cooked something for fun, Mason would make sure to spit it into a napkin and laugh about it like he was doing me a favor. But that night when I told them I wanted to be a chef, something shifted. "You're serious?" Dad said, his voice sharp now, jaw clenching. "After everything I've done to raise you into a man?" "You didn't raise me," I snapped back. "You trained me to be just like you, and I'm not." That was when he slapped the table. The plate of meatloaf rattled, and a fork fell to the floor. "Then get the hell out of my house," he growled. I remember Mason smirking, leaning back in his chair like he was watching a movie. "You're disowning me over a career choice?" "No," my dad said. "I'm disowning you because you're not my son. My son wouldn't throw away everything we've built for some damn apron and sauté pants." I was in my room, stuffing clothes into a backpack. I took what little cash I'd saved up from doing odd jobs. They didn't try to stop me. I spent that night sleeping in the back of a friend's car. At that moment, I felt like a nobody. I started taking whatever work I could find. Dishwashing, mopping floors, working 14-hour shifts at greasy diners that smelled like fryer oil and bad decisions. I just needed enough to survive, to save, and to slowly build toward culinary school. I stayed in hostels, sometimes even in churches offering shelter, and showered in gym bathrooms. Pride? I left that behind a long time ago. What made it worse was that they didn't just kick me out, they pretended I never existed. My father removed every photo of me from the house. Mason told people at our old high school that I ran off to join the circus or something. Whenever someone asked where I'd gone, they'd change the subject. They erased me. They say hate is a bad motivator. Maybe, but being told you're nothing? That sticks. That burns in your gut. And I promised myself, if I ever made it, I'd make them see me, not as the failure they cast out, but as the man who rose from everything they tried to destroy. They just didn't know how far I was willing to go. Looking back, I always assumed that getting kicked out would be the worst of it, that once I hit rock bottom, things could only go up from there. What I didn't realize was that there's always a basement beneath rock bottom, and my own family was the one waiting there, ready to pull me down. At 19, I was just starting to get my bearings. I'd managed to land a line cook position at this little Mediterranean place run by a retired couple who saw something in me. They didn't pay much, but they fed me after every shift, let me stay on a broken-down cot in the stockroom, and treated me like I mattered. That alone made it feel like I'd won the lottery. But just when I was finally starting to breathe again, everything came crashing down. Then the IRS showed up. It was a random Tuesday, hot and heavy with humidity. I was breaking down boxes near the back door when two men in dark suits walked into the kitchen, asking for me. They said my full name, clearly and confidently. That was my first warning sign. Nobody who calls me by all three names is bringing good news. Next thing I knew, I was in handcuffs. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I wasn't making enough money to even worry about taxes. I had no credit, no assets, nothing to steal or hide. So when they started throwing out words like tax evasion, corporate fraud, and embezzlement, it was like they were speaking a different language. They said I owned a company, my name was on the documents, the bank accounts, the tax filings. They had paperwork, emails, even a supposed signature on contracts and fake invoices. I didn't understand any of it. It didn't even feel real. How could someone with barely enough to eat be running a criminal enterprise? They held me for questioning, but it didn't stop there. I was booked, processed, and told I'd be held until trial. Bail? Out of reach. I didn't have family I could call. No one who'd pick up, anyway. Even if I did, I knew they'd laugh before helping. My public defender, a woman named Rose, was one of the few people who treated me like a human being. She was overworked and exhausted, but she believed me. She told me the whole thing didn't add up. The documents were too clean, too manufactured. There were signs that whoever had set this up knew exactly how to exploit someone like me, someone with no resources, no voice, and no allies. My mind went to my father and Mason almost immediately. They had access to my personal information. They knew my social security number, had seen my signature 100 times. And they had motive. Money was everything in that house. Everything. If there was a way to make more of it while shifting the blame onto the one son they'd already cast out, I couldn't imagine them losing sleep over it. But the thing was, I had no proof, just suspicion. Despite Rose's efforts, the case wasn't dropped. She did manage to chip away at some of the charges, got a few things dismissed, convinced the court I wasn't a flight risk. But I still spent 6 full months behind bars waiting for things to shake out. Eventually, the charges were dropped pending further investigation, which I came to learn is legal speak for, we're not admitting we were wrong, but we can't prove we're right either. No public apology. No follow-up. No one came to clear my name in the papers or on the news. They just let me out like nothing happened, like I hadn't been caged for half a year while the rest of the world moved on. And I still didn't know who had done it. Not for sure. But deep down, I could feel it. I could picture Mason's smug face, could imagine my father slamming his fist on the desk as he denied knowing anything about it. I could hear the lies they probably fed anyone who asked. That I was troubled. That I always had a rebellious streak. That I'd finally snapped. They wouldn't have to fake the concern. They'd been playing the victim for years. The worst part wasn't even the jail time. It was walking back into a world that no longer trusted me. People who once believed in me now crossed the street when they saw me coming. My name had become a stain, something people avoided saying out loud. But I started rebuilding. Quietly. Anonymously. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. Not when my own blood might have been the ones who nearly ruined me. I had no answers, but I had 1,000 questions and a fire in my chest that refused to die down. I didn't know it then, but the truth was out there, hidden in files, in forgotten storage drives, in careless words left behind by people who thought I'd never come back. I adopted a new name, not legally, just socially. A version of myself that was harder, quieter, less trusting. I found a new city. One where no one knew the story, where no one cared about what had happened, only what I could do. And then culinary school came into the picture. It wasn't fancy. Definitely not some glossy brochure-worthy institute. Just a small, privately run program for cooks who couldn't afford Le Cordon Bleu but still had fire in their gut. I didn't talk about my past. Not to anyone. Not about jail, not about my family, not even about the food that had once made me dream. I kept my head down and my knife sharp. It was during those long, silent nights in the school's practice kitchen that I started thinking less like a victim and more like someone who had something to prove. For the first time, the fire inside me wasn't just rage or desperation, it was drive. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted to excel. I wanted to outcook, outlast, and outsmart every expectation anyone had ever placed on me. But even then, there was this weight. A quiet, suffocating heaviness that never left. I couldn't explain it at the time, but looking back, I think I was still carrying the fallout. Still trying to stitch up the pieces of a reputation that had been torn apart. Still angry. Still confused. Still wondering who exactly had set me up, and why. I never stopped suspecting. Never stopped wondering if it really was my father. It would make sense. They had motive, opportunity, and zero love left for me. But there was nothing to prove it. No confession, no paper trail, just my gut screaming in an empty room. Still, suspicion isn't closure. The years passed in a blur of part-time gigs and late-night cook-offs. I never stayed in one place long enough to unpack a suitcase. But I never learned to forget. What they took from me wasn't just time or reputation. They took my foundation. They made me question whether anyone would ever see me as more than a name on a police report. And the worst part? I couldn't even tell my side. Because even if I did, who would believe it? Who believes the guy with the criminal record and the sad story? Eventually, I stopped trying to explain. That's when the letter came. It was handwritten, with careful cursive that I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. My mother's writing. The same woman who had quietly exited the picture when I was 10. I hadn't heard from her in years, didn't even know if she remembered my birthday. And yet, there it was, a short letter, no return address, no apology, just a quiet explanation. She wrote that she'd heard about what happened to me, that while she didn't have all the facts, she had her suspicions. She mentioned the family business. She mentioned my father's tendency to find creative ways to handle money. And she told me that before the divorce, she used to help with the bookkeeping. She said if I ever wanted answers, real answers, I should go to a specific storage locker in a small town 2 states away. She included a key. That was it. No, I love you. No, I'm sorry. Just a breadcrumb, left in the dark for me to find. And maybe I should have ignored it. Maybe I should have burned the letter and kept going with the life I'd built from scratch. But something in me shifted. Because for the first time in years, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted the truth. The storage facility was wedged behind a warehouse, more rust than building. I remember standing in front of it with the key in my hand, second-guessing everything. But then the lock clicked. Inside was a single unit. Just a few dusty plastic bins, a file cabinet, and an old desktop computer, the kind with a monitor the size of a microwave. There were printouts, flash drives, and hand-labeled folders with years scribbled on the front. It smelled like mildew and old receipts. And buried in all of it, truth. Not the kind that screamed its presence. The kind that whispered in spreadsheets and transfers and QuickBooks files. Old ledgers with inconsistent numbers, names that didn't belong, and strange payment loops between companies that didn't exist outside of a paper trail. My mom had kept everything. Notes, passwords, backup logs from when she used to help my father balance the books during the early years of the business. I spent hours, then days, sifting through it all. There were documents, contracts, invoices, even payroll entries that didn't line up. A pattern of siphoning money through shell corporations. The thing that broke me wasn't just the realization that they may have framed me, it was the carelessness of it. Like they didn't even expect me to survive, let alone come back and investigate. Like I was just a speed bump on the road to whatever power and profit they thought they were entitled to. That's when the plan began forming. Not revenge. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I had nothing, no money, no name, no allies. But I had information. And for the first time in years, I had something resembling direction. So I did what I'd always done best. I worked. Quietly. Tirelessly. I started cataloging everything. Converted the paper files into digital backups. Organized every USB, every note, every suspicious transaction. I created a map of corruption, dotted with dates and deals and shell entities. All of it linked to my father's business. All of it hidden beneath layers of fake contractors and backdated invoices. I finally knew. Not just suspected, knew. They did this. All of it. I worked myself ragged. Mornings in class, afternoons in restaurants, nights on catering shifts or food trucks, sometimes back-to-back. I didn't date. Didn't party. I barely spoke. The only relationships I maintained were with mentors, chefs who saw my drive and gave me chances. One helped me land an internship at a rising restaurant chain. Another helped me secure funding to open my first spot. A tiny, hole-in-the-wall concept that somehow made the local food blogs within its first few weeks. From there, it was momentum. One place turned into 2, then 5, then 10. And through it all, I kept my head down. I didn't flaunt my success. I didn't post flashy updates or attend family reunions. I stayed in the background, watching, waiting, because I'd been keeping an eye on the family business, too. And from the outside, it looked like things were unraveling. Slowly, like a slow-motion car crash. Lawsuits. Failed contracts. Rumors of financial trouble. And I knew it was only a matter of time. That's when I made the call. Under my new identity, I created a private equity firm. Hired the best lawyers money could buy. Quietly started acquiring debt from businesses my father had screwed over. Bought shares through intermediaries. Sat in board meetings anonymously. Waited as the house of cards began to sway. 2 years later, I had controlling interest. They still didn't know it was me, but they would. And when that moment came, when I finally walked back into that boardroom in a custom suit, carrying folders and flash drives filled with everything they thought they buried, I would look them in the eyes. and I'd make sure they remembered the son they tried to erase. The boardroom was half full, filled with the same aging executives who once sneered at me from across dinner tables and family events. They didn't recognize me at first, not until I took off my sunglasses and placed a thick folder on the table. Then the color drained from their faces. My father stared like he was looking at a ghost. Mason laughed at first, said something about it being a nice stunt, but his voice cracked when he realized I wasn't there to beg or plead or make peace. I was there to take everything. I laid out the paperwork slowly, methodically. Ownership documents, chain of purchase records, all legally binding. The room fell dead silent when I announced the name of the private equity firm, the very firm that now controlled their debt, their operations, their entire structure. Then I reached into the folder and pulled out the real storm, a stack of evidence. My father's expression didn't change much. He was always good at stonewalling, but his hands were shaking. Mason, on the other hand, turned white. I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. I just laid it all out and said that, effective immediately, I was removing both of them from executive duties. My father would be reassigned. Mason would be given one option, one single chance to avoid legal action, stay on payroll as a full-time janitor or face fraud charges that, this time, would stick. They both erupted. Mason tried to lunge across the table, but security stepped in two towering men in suits who didn't flinch. I appointed a new interim CFO that same day, an older employee who'd once been bullied out of the company by Mason years ago. He looked at me like he'd just won the lottery. I told him, quietly, that it was time to clean house. And I meant that literally. Within the month, the office had been transformed. My father, once the king of the compound, was now driving the company car, not as CEO, but as the personal chauffeur for clients. Mason cleaned restrooms, stocked vending machines, and was required to clock in like any other staffer. No special privileges. No shortcuts. The old employees watched it unfold with a mixture of awe and caution. I didn't gloat. I didn't grandstand. I just let the weight of the new order settle in. The final touch came at the annual gala. It was a lavish event. I spared no expense. The who's who of local business attended, sipping wine and marveling at the transformation of a company they thought was on its last legs. And in the middle of it all, I made sure Mason and my father were in full uniform, serving canapes and champagne to the same people who once groveled at their feet. Mason couldn't even make eye contact with me. My father, for all his pride, kept his gaze low. He didn't say a word the entire evening, but I did. I stood on the stage, microphone in hand, and looked out over the crowd. To those who build empires on the backs of the forgotten, I said, remember this, what you bury doesn't always stay buried. I raised my glass, and they followed. Then, just before the night ended, I turned to the new CFO and said two words I'd waited years to say. Send it. The envelope went out that night. A package addressed to the IRS, filled with every document they'd ever need to reopen the books. I didn't need to stick around for the outcome. I already knew what I'd done. I hadn't just sent paperwork. I'd launched an investigation. The kind that starts with quiet inquiries and ends with subpoenas. The kind where agents in tailored suits show up unannounced, and the word audit becomes a death knell for the arrogant. As I walked away from the gala, the music still playing behind me, I felt lighter. Not happy, not healed, but unburdened. They'd stolen my life once. This time, I took theirs apart piece by piece and made them watch.